Alright, so over here on the JP side of things, we have every single ruler going up on rate up. This is very similar to the Saber class that we've had for the last 2 weeks, although because the ruler class is a bit smaller, they're able to get all of them on rate up at once, as opposed to having to split the class in half like they did for the Saber class ones. If you were wondering, like during the first week where people like Muramasa or Ibuki were, because the class is so large and I guess they didn't want to have like 20 different banners up at once, they decided to split it between 2 weeks, which I think is kind of smart if they don't want to try to overwhelm the player base by having too many banners up at once, although this is still quite a lot, but because it is still quite a lot, I wanted to go ahead and make this video for my JP players or for NA players that want 2 years in advance to go ahead and be able to plan for when these servants are coming back around, and maybe if they want to budget their sync courts and, try to fit in when they would want to summon for, say, somebody like Ruler Scotty, or for somebody like Kenshin, who either come back around this year or are coming out this year in the case of Ruler Kenshin. So I thought I'd go ahead and just make this, kind of going over the banners and talking about which ones I think were worth it or not. Starting off with the Jean one over here, I do think she is rather strong. She slots into existing arts teams rather well, functionally being kind of a proto Merlin or Lady Avalon, whatever you want to call her, with her own NP giving you survivability, giving you debuff cleanse, and giving you invincibility. It is rather nice to pair with, say, somebody like Castoria's NP, as she does actually give you healing. It's another way to get your debuffs off of your party, and it's another form of survivability. And her first skill gets buffed during Ordeal Call 2. That gives you an arts buff, stars every single turn, and also gives you a little bit of battery, with her second skill still being really good for being able to neuter the enemy's defense. I think she is rather strong, just maybe not worth rolling for, just because of her status as being a non-limited, non-story locked 5-star servant. It does mean that, one, she can spook you on any single banner in the game that you decide to go on, and it just means that if they ever do a free 5-star ticket for another, download campaign for anniversary, whatever they want to toss out a free 5-star ticket for, you could always just pick her up. And I think the more free to play you are, the more unappealing banners like this are, right? Unless Jean is your absolute favorite character, it's probably better to go ahead and use your sync courts on some of the limited servants that are going to be on this rate up. Now, also people that are just watching this and are maybe curious about why all these characters are coming back around and what the grand, summon type servant thing is that we're going to be getting at the end of the year. We don't have all of the details, but we do know that if you do have a servant, it doesn't have to be anyone in particular, you can grab that servant, you can go ahead and take them to level 100, so you just have to invest a couple of grails into them. You also have to get their skills up, and I believe you also have to get them bond 10, which is why I guess they're throwing them out early, so you can kind of get a head start on that bond farming. You will be able to at least use their bond CE and their normal CE at the same time, but I would also like to see if it remains to be seen if they get like a special damage bonus during the end of part 2, if that might be a thing, or if they're going to get some like boosted stats or something along those lines. But I just want to toss that out there as we go through all these different characters. Now, Ruler Marthur, you're going to see in quite a few of these rate-ups, because it's not exactly like there's a whole ton of low rarity rulers for them to toss on these banners. So it is really good if you want either Ruler Martha or you want Astrea, who you'll see over here on this banner over here. I do think if you're trying to high roll on one of the banners, you do try to go for one of the ones that has a 5-star you want and Astrea. Nothing against Ruler Martha. Her kit, I guess, is still basic enough that you can get some value out of her, as she is rocking triple power mods, and she does at least have the battery, but it is a little old, I would say. There's not a whole lot of extra bells and whistles going on that servant, whereas, again, somebody like Astrea is still holding up rather well with a decent power mod, and then also just being an arts crit servant that prepares their own stars for them. So, it just makes life really easy whenever you're trying to use her. And in general, anybody that's used Astrea can just tell you this servant is rather solid, pretty much just being very self-sufficient, giving themselves all the buffs they would ever need. But unfortunately, I don't think this is the exact banner you want to be summoning on. Now, I love Amakusa. I went broke whenever he initially came out over on the NA side of things, and it is really nice that his NP removes all enemy buffs, and because it's an AoE NP, technically on every single enemy, so just complete buff removal on the enemy party, but without any power mods and anything to really boost his damage up to decent levels. The fact that he's a ruler is actually kind of a detriment to him, because there's not very many times when you're going to be getting super effective damage with this guy. And again, has a very, very strong kit, looks really good on paper, but in practice, I mean, they gotta toss this guy like a good power mod, an evil power mod, whatever direction they want to go in with this guy, but he just needs something else. But I guess he is one of those servants that I guess if you do want to summon on this banner, it's a good investment because you're going to be hoping that whenever they do buff him, he gets a rather solid buff. And the buff for the last year have been all really strong. I mean, even Medusa over there, who I would say got kind of shafted on her most recent buff, it's still not bad. It's boosting her damage up a little bit. It's just not super great for her. Like, they probably could have been done a little bit better, but even the ones that are considered to be shafts aren't all that bad. They're not completely worthless. I mean, we've definitely seen some really worthless buffs in the past. You know, people like, say, Assassin Lishu, and they're like, all right, we're just going to buff the damage of your NP. It's like, all right, you're not going to give him anything. You can't, like, I don't know, let him bomb stars on his NP or anything along those lines. But yeah, Ruler Amakusa, not a bad servant, because obviously when you're doing all the things that he's doing, you can't be considered a bad servant. He's just kind of middling, right? Not really doing enough like some of the more modern servants, but not doing so little that he's going to be considered absolutely mid. But there are better banners for you to high roll on every ruler going on right up. This is kind of an interesting one, because I've always said that Sherlock is the best servant that you'll never use. His NP is always going to be very, very strong. Being able to bypass like all of your enemy's defensive abilities while also getting some big crit damage is just always going to be good. That can't be bad. And then now he's got a big old battery to help him get into his own NP. But the problem is, if you're using Sherlock, you're just in this position where you probably could be using somebody better. And the other unfortunate thing is that while being able to bypass, you know, enemy defensive abilities is really good, you could just do that with a CE if the DPS you're using doesn't have something like Pierce Invincibility already on their kit. And if they do, then I think somebody like Sherlock kind of loses a lot of their value, right? Because you can bring him in what people would call like FGO esports, right? He's like one of those type of characters. But outside of that, I mean, you're probably just as a normal player going to bring somebody like a friend Castoria, and even if you don't have your own, you're going to bring somebody like a Jufu, a Proto Merlin, a Waver, even a Reigns. If you're playing Buster and you don't have Koyanskaya, probably going to bring somebody like a Merlin or even a Chen Gong, right? A Shen Gong can kind of support Buster servants, especially if they're a Buster Berserker servant. And then for Quick, I mean, I guess this guy's kind of decent if you want to slot him in there, but then it's a little bit awkward because you want to be doing like quick chains and genning stars, and I guess he can gen some stars. You know, he has like the star bomb skill, but I don't know. He's just a little bit of a weird servant to use. Not bad, but definitely not worth your Saint Quartz when every single ruler is going up on right up right now. Chishi Hang, I think, is in a very interesting case, because if you were playing during like year 2, year 3 when this guy came out, you'll remember that he was pretty much able to solo everything in the game, and he can still have some really strong soloing abilities, but I do think his kit and his age is starting to show, because when I was trying to do solos with him about a year and a half back, it just seemed like he was kind of missing out on a couple of things. The NP is still very strong, and the effects on his skills are still really good, and I think that's the problem with the developers over at Lesengo, that this guy is really hard to give a buff to, because he has a very, very strong flooring, right? So it's really hard to give him anything without making him outright busted bonkers. But then when he's going into, say, more recent boss fights, especially against ones where the enemies can just kind of yeet all of your buffs off of you, it does make things for him a little bit difficult. But I guess that could also be said for really any solo servant that doesn't have something like buff removal resistance or any way to kind of combat that when enemy bosses are doing that. But he's just very odd. Not bad, but he's just maybe a little frustrating for newer players to use, because he'll either absolutely dominate the fight, or he will get booty blasted because he just doesn't have the newer tools needed to take on some of these boss fights. But I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily to go for him. It's just not what I would do if I was a newer player, because we do have two particularly powerful ruler class servants that are going to be on rate up with every single ruler coming back. Then we move over to Lancer Artoria. Not Lancer Artoria. Well, it's like Summer Lancer Artoria, right? Like, you can understand like what I'm saying, Lancer Artoria. But Ruler Artoria, I guess. She recently got a buff over here on the JP side of things that actually does make her rather strong if you do want to use her in, say, like your Buster AoE teams. And for that reason, if you need a good Buster AoE servant, I think she's a great option. I think the second skill makes her very fun to use. In fact, in the Kukulkan video, you actually saw me use her in one of the team comps, just because being able to force out one of your servants that's in the party, just force out all their cards for a turn, is really nice. It lets you have some control over the RNG, and the buffs that she gives the party ain't bad. You know, being able to buff their crit damage, being able to give them NP gain for a turn, having a solid battery herself, and then since she has the whole thing of being able to use all the different card types, even though she is predominantly Buster, she does have the Omni buff on her NP that is also rather nice. Plus, I mean, I know this isn't really related to gameplay reasons, but her NP, especially on like the first stage, is pretty cool. Like, it's a pretty dope NP. So if, you know, the animations are ever going to be something that tips the scales on whether you summon for a servant, I think she might have that, she might have some money going for her on that way. But aside from that, just really solid Buster AoE servant. I'm glad that I finally am able to say that after her most recent buff. But aside from that, it's not like she's doing anything else in particular that's like broken. I mean, I always compare her with, say, somebody like Summer BB, where Summer BB, the year before she came out, had the ability to lock cards down, and she has the ability to shuffle cards, and being able to set your different cards as opposed to shuffle them is just a bit better. You know, I think Summer BB definitely got the better skill out of the two, but it's still not bad as far as utility skills are concerned. Then we have Himiko. Himiko can be, I guess, technically a solo servant if you want to use her, but in the age that we're in, especially as I mentioned in the video yesterday or in the Kukulkan one, we did throw up Himiko when we were talking about the overcharge abilities, because Himiko still does have that, right? Like, not only is she a good Buster crit servant, still a decent support for the party, but being able to overclock NP stages by 2, sorry, it's 8 in the morning, I just woke up, but I gotta get this daily video out. But being able to do that is always going to be very strong, while also having pretty easy access into her niche because of her massive battery. I don't think she's ever going to be a bad option per se. It's just, again, I think one of those, maybe saying a win more servant is the best way to describe her, because if you're going for Himiko, your account is probably already decently set up, because she's one of those servants that I don't think works very well if you don't have other servants that are good with her. So if you're more of a newer player, probably not the best servant to go ahead and try to pick up, but if you do have more of an established box, then maybe it is worth for you to go ahead and roll for the servant and try to pick them up. But I'm not exactly saying that you need her, because, again, she is one of those win more servants. Like, it's kind of like a Sherlock in that way, where they're nice to have whenever you do need to break them out for their niche, but how often are you going to be breaking them out for said niche unless you really like the character and are going out of your way to use them? Then we have Karen. Karen's not a whole lot to say for Karen. I mean, she's just a solid, quick AoE servant. I mean, she's got so much going on for her kit that, like, I think just calling her a good, quick AoE servant is doing her a little bit of a disservice. But, I mean, that's realistically the reason you're going to be summoning for her. It's not like there's all these extra bells and whistles that we got to be concerned about, where it's like, oh my goodness, but she has, like, this niche over here and that niche over there. Like, she is just a solid, quick AoE servant. But it's going to come down to, do you already have a solid, quick AoE servant? Like, do you already have Dante's? Do you already have Voyager? Do you already have Rikyu? And then if you don't have those characters, then Karen becomes more appealing. But if you've already got your, solid, quick AoE looper person, then she's not as appealing, and you're probably not going to go summon for her. So, again, this one pretty much comes down to your own discretion and you looking at your own box. Ruler Moriarty, as much as I love this guy, you guys know that I summoned for him specifically when he came out over here on NA, and then I actually managed to get him on my GSSR, and I'm very happy about that. But definitely not an arts AoE servant for people to really want to be starting out with, because while you can do farming with him, it's not exactly his designed purpose. He's definitely more designed to go into challenge quests and beat those guys up. What with him having a lot of different debuffs, he still has the massive battery, but the guy does want to be in challenge quests, right? Like, he's got the dodge survivability. I believe it's also sure hit is what he has on the first skill. It's just things you want to bring when fighting bosses. And again, because our servants are so good nowadays, we have people like Castoria, you've got Jufu, you've got Nerobride, you've got Proto Merlin, just all these different art supports and looping supports that you can bring. You can kind of get anyone to start looping nowadays, but I don't think he's one of the better options, right? Like, it's like, go figure, you're going to want to use somebody like, say, Summer Ibuki, or another arts AoE ruler that's going to be featured here in just a second, just as your looper, if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking for more of a challenge quest servant, then Moriarty's definitely your guy. It's definitely fine to go ahead and summon for them. But if you want more of a looper, then you're probably better just summoning for Ruler Melusine. Then we have the Ruler Scotty over here. I mean, what's to say? It's the best quick support in the game. You know, giving you 65% quick, still giving you the 50% battery, giving you the attack buff instead of the defense down means you can carry that buff into all 3 nodes, meaning that your overall damage is going to be higher than just using double caster Scotty. But I mean, what do you want me to say? Do you want to do stuff with quick? Then you go for Ruler Scotty. If you don't give a crap about quick at all, you know, you don't want to use any quick servants, you just don't care, then you don't summon for this banner. Now, I think she's worth having because I think quick is still fine enough in the state that it's in. I think people massively undersell how good the card is. I think the way to actually be looking at it is that quick is in a very fine position themselves. They're just not as good as Arts and Buster, right? Which is perfectly fine. So, like, technically, worst of the 3 card types, but that kind of fluctuates, right? Like, with year 3 to, like, year 5, quick was the best card type in the game. But then now, you know, we have people like Artoria running around, and then now we have Koyanskaya running around. Buster and Arts now have their own support that is on the level, if not superseding, you know, what Scotty and now Ruler Scotty are able to do. So now it's kind of taking a back seat again. But the characters themselves are still very strong. I mean, look at all the quick servants that are getting buffs or that are releasing. You have new Dantes. You have Wangina later on this year on the NA side of things. You have Bisquion that just released. Then you have Kama receiving her buff recently. I mean, quick is packing some really strong heavy hitters. And so if you want to be able to use them properly, then you do want to go ahead and get your grubby little mitts on, you know, Ruler Scotty or Caster Scotty whenever she comes out. But Ruler Scotty is definitely more of the prize because she doubles as the better one to be using when doing quick farming. So very unfortunate that Astray is not on this banner because then I think it would be like a really, really enticing banner. But I do think it's very, very strong. I myself, if I get a login bonus here or there, or maybe I get up to 30 Saint Quartz, am highly considering summoning on this banner. But then again, I probably should be saving my Saint Quartz for when Koyanskaya comes out because, I mean, that's just the thing I talked about a little bit earlier, that Buster's in a better position, so I'd rather be using my Buster servants than my quick servants, especially if I already have the normal Scotty, so I can kind of get by with quick. Then we have Pope Joanna. I'm going to be doing a video on her in the coming month because she releases over here on the NA side of things. I think she is a rather solid Arts AoE servant that kind of bridges the gap between, say, somebody like, well, Ruler Melusine over here as a farming servant, and then, I'm forgetting his name, Moriarty. Yeah, literally blanked for a second. Ruler Moriarty being a CQ servant. She's kind of in the middle. I mean, she can loop fine enough, but because she's also a ruler, she kind of has some applicability going into challenge quests. The hard thing is whether or not you really liked her in Traum or not. Like, I really enjoyed Traum when I was reading it, and I really came to like this character that I had no expectations for. So she's a little tempting for me to summon on, but if you haven't read Traum or you didn't care about it, then I think it's just very easy for you to skip out, because it's not like she's doing anything that's particularly broken, and she's not really like filling any niches that we don't already have. So it kind of comes up to your own discretion of how much you enjoyed the character in Traum. I mean, if you really liked her, then, hey, maybe she's worth tossing a couple of multis for. But if you didn't really care for Traum or you haven't gotten that far yet, then you could definitely skip out on this character. Ruler Melusine, I mean, she's a really solid AoE art servant. I mean, she does the looping. I mean, what else is there to say? She's really, really solid. Like, arguably only beat out by somebody like Summer Ibuki. I mean, 80% battery is really strong. She can also gen the stars. She can do the crit. She's got the power mods. I mean, what do you want me to say about this character? They're bonkers. They're nuts. They're really, really strong. If you need yourself a arts AoE servant that can do the looping for you, and you don't have a solid one, you probably could wait out for the rest of the year and just wait for a new one to drop, or wait for an old raid up to come back around and summon for that character. Wait for the Berserkers, which we know is at least going to be about 2 months away, because we have to get through all of the rulers this week, and then we have to get through all of the archers in the next 2 weeks, because they're probably going to split it like they did the Saber class one. So you could wait for, say, somebody like Summer Ibuki to come back around, or you could just bag yourself a Summer Melusine over here. It's really pick your poison on the dragons. Do you want the excessively large lady in Ibuki, or do you want the excessively tiny lady in Melusine over here? And then finally, we have Ruler Kagetora, who I think is probably one of, if not the most must-summonable character on here. That might come surprising to some people because of how good Ruler Scotty is in enabling the entire quick archetype, to be able to play the game and kind of compete in a farming sense. But I have used this character for so much. I actually kind of went a little brokey when I was trying to summon for her. I went for NP2. I was actually aiming for NP3, but only bagged the 2, but that has been one of the best decisions I've ever made because whenever fighting a manpower mod person, she just butt blasts them into oblivion. But even in multi-core setups for 90 plus and 90 plus plus, this character has proven invaluable because they just hit so hard. They just do so much damage, and their kit is packed full of really strong effects. I mean, what it's removing enemy like defensive buffs on her NP, the solid arts buff, the double dodge. If I remember correctly, it's also like she overclocks her own NP charge by 1. Like it's the 50% bad. Like bro, it's just nutty. Like she's just doing way too much. I mean, they really did take the formula for the Lancer Kagetora, beefed it up for a 5-star, and you can definitely tell. It definitely shows. This servant, I know I'm not doing her enough justice, kind of being a little, like, wakey and a little groggy over here, but you gotta believe me, this character is so good and such a strong investment that I think, well, the Sabers all came out, and I think you can kind of comfortably skip out on all of them unless you're really a big fan of Salter and you really want her. I think this is the first one that's really, really hard to skip out on if you do not have her. I mean, if I had the knowledge I had of Ruler Kagetora, but didn't have her over on the JP side of things, I think this would be the banner that I would be going for, especially because it also features Artoria. So even if you miss out on Ruler Kagetora, you're probably going to pick up some copies of Artoria over there, and then you still kind of get a servant that fulfills the same role, just not as well, because Kagetora is bonkers. But with all that being said, if you're playing the JP side of things, let me know which banner you're going to be summoning on. And if you're looking at this from an NA player's perspective, let me know which banner you are the most hyped to summon on, or if you're going to be summoning at all when they drop over here on the NA side of things in about 2 years. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourself a nice day, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace, late, guys.